drop off of the call. Again, welcome to everyone. Um, we are going to start with 3 minutes of silence. As I put in the announcements about this event, for those of you who are dialing in from the U.S., today is Veterans Day in the U.S. I heard over on the radio as I was driving over to my office here at my parents' house. My parents have let me use their wonderful retreat space for this webinar. I heard that in honor of Veterans Day, there are 19 million men and women who have served in the U.S. military. And so this is a day that we honor them and their service and their fight for justice and peace. So let's take 3 minutes. And normally when we start these webinars, we start with 3 minutes of silence anyway. And so you are invited to use this time for, if you have a prayer practice, a meditation practice, or you just want to sit in silence and do some breathing. This is just a chance to get centered and arrive in the space. You can put your feet on the floor if you want. Just take a minute to notice your breath. And I'll just time us, and we'll go for about 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when we're about a minute out. So again, thanks to everyone for being here. We're entering into silence for 3 minutes. We're going to be honoring those who've served in the U.S. military, but also this is just a time for centering and time for prayer and meditation. So I invite you all into silence. Thank you. Thirty more seconds of silence, and perhaps just use this time to feel your body and to remember that writing and living are embodied practices. Just feel where your body is as you enter this conversation in this space. Thank you all so much. So for those of you who have not joined this Essentials for Spiritual Writers series in the past, my name is Kate Rademacher, and as I was mentioning earlier before we started recording, I assumed leadership of Writing for Your Life in January of 2023. This platform was founded by Brian Elaine, who formerly founded the Fred Buechner Center and has done a lot of amazing work. And he also founded How to Heal Our Divides and several of our platforms, Publishing in Color. So I really feel honored and humbled about taking on this ministry of Writing for Your Life. And so glad you all are here, and glad to see in the chat that community is an important part of Writing for Your Life for several people. It has been for me as well. I've been involved with the Writing for Your Life community since 2017 when my first book was published, and I attended a conference that Barbara Brown Taylor was the keynote speaker of, and I've been involved since then. And again, really delighted to be here and delighted to be part of this community. So as I've been transitioning with Brian and thinking about sort of the future of Writing for Your Life and how we can convene in person or online or through hybrid options, I'm doing a lot of discernment, and I'm going to talk about some of the resources at the end that I'm using to support me in that process, including several of you have had wonderful conversations. Dr. Portia Brown, who's on the call, has been extremely generous with her time with me. So I've been supported by a lot of colleagues and friends in this process. And one of the questions that I'm really thinking a lot about is, what's the point of all this writing? Many of us feel called to write, and what's it all about? What are we trying to accomplish, or what is God trying to accomplish through us? And I'm going to tell you all a little bit about my career in international public health. I have a colleague here, Cynthia Geary, who's going to be our guest speaker at the end. And Cynthia and I worked together for many years in the international public health field, and she and I have both written books. And I'll let her talk about her book. Both of our books are not related to our day jobs per se. But one of the things that has been really important in my work that's been sort of pseudo-academic, I've been a co-author in over 20 articles in the peer-reviewed journal, including the Lancet Global Health Science and Practice, which I'll be talking about, a number of journals. So in my public health arena, thought leadership is really important. It's valued. It's something that donors and people that are, up on the food chain, want us to be thought leaders. So then moving to sort of thinking about faith-based writing and writing for spiritual writers, the question I'm having is that an appropriate term to be using for those of us who identify as Christian? I'm, as some of you know, in discernment to become hopefully, God willing, an Episcopal priest. I'm starting seminary next year, and my job, as I see it, is to live the good news and to help be an evangelist for the good news. And so is that the same as thought leadership? So there's a lot of discussion happening right now about leadership in general, about women's leadership, about servant leadership, about adaptive leadership, about facilitative leadership. So there's just a huge conversation going on about leadership. And I do want to acknowledge that words matter, of course. I don't know who first said this phrase to me, so I can't cite it properly, but I know someone once said to me, there's also heart leadership. And for me, I like that. I'm not sure, again, if somebody has a good citation, you can put it in the chat, but this idea of maybe we combine our hearts, spirits, and minds. There's a number of you on the phone I know who are interested in themes of leadership and changing narratives about leadership, again, including Dr. Brown, who I just met with this morning. So I just want to hold out that as an alternative phrase, which is heart leadership. This was a picture I took this morning and posted on Instagram and Facebook that I took at the end of my morning prayers. And this is a little angel that I bought at the Wild Goose Festival a couple years ago by a local, I'm forgetting the name of the artist, but you can see the red bird on her chest. My first book was called Falling Red Bird. And what I love about this is I was outside during my morning prayers, and you can see the back of the angel, and she's got a heart on her back. And so one thing I also want to point out about thought leadership and heart leadership is that you don't always lead from the front, right? Your name may not always be first. Your name may not be on the billboard. Your may not be on the grant, or at least first one on the grant, but you can still contribute to thought leadership. And I'm going to give you some concrete examples. So the way we're going to run this session is I'm going to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Cynthia Geary, to give a little bit of an update about one of her books that she's published. But I'm just going to pause here because I think that as we think about thought leadership, we really need to be grounded in our principles. And another way to say this is ethics. I had a conversation with a coach and consultant I'm working with, a freelancer whose name is Shannon. I'm going to give her contact information at the end. And she really encouraged me to think about ethics this week. What are my ethics? And I think the word principles might be slightly more accessible to people. So just, and she also asked about what gives you hope. And then a final sort of more perhaps pointed way of asking this is, what is your agenda? If somebody stopped you on the bus or on the sidewalk and said, "What's your agenda?" with kind of like, an accusatory tone, what would you say? What would you say is your agenda? What's the agenda of your writing? What's the agenda for your life? And so I'm just going to give you about 1 minute to take a piece of paper and just jot down whatever comes to mind. Don't self-edit yourself. Just write down, any of these questions that sinks to you. What are your core principles? What is your vision for a better world? What gives you hope? And what is your agenda? And that includes as a writer, but also as a person, maybe as a professional or just in the world. So I'm going to put myself on mute and really, really fast, 1 minute. Don't edit, self-edit. You take about 30 more seconds. Sorry, I stopped sharing there for a second. Okay, so let's just, in the spirit of community building, if people can just put a few things in the chat that if you want to share anything that you wrote down, you can type it in, and I'm going to just read a couple, and no obligation to write it. While you're typing that up and sort of moving your thoughts into the chat, I want to make a linkage with this, which is, what is your brand? Okay. So thought leadership is kind of a fancy word. It's a more academic phrase. In sort of the writing language, sometimes talk about what is your brand or what is your platform. I think these concepts are all interrelated. So I'm thinking about doing another session in the series about what is your brand. And so I just say this because, as I mentioned a couple times already, my colleague, Dr. Cindy Geary, is here with us. And so yesterday, when I was preparing, this week when I was preparing for this remarks, I wanted to pull up a headshot for Cindy to put in and this is what came up. Cindy, is this you?
No, that is not me. That's an actress who was in Northern Exposure.
Yes. Oh, that's right. She was in Northern Exposure. I never recognized her. I forgot. I didn't know her. Her name was Cynthia Geary. So there's two Cindy Gearys at least two in the world. And so part of the point about thought leadership, and thank you, Cindy, for letting me use your doppelganger here, is that the world is extremely noisy. The World Health Organization has told us that we're living in the middle of an infodemic. We're not just in the middle of a pandemic or a epidemic of health concerns, including COVID-19, but we live in an infodemic. So I just wanted to look up Cindy's headshot. I know she has a website. She's a published author. I couldn't find Cindy's website. And so then I got discouraged, right? This is the first hit I got when I put Cindy's name into Google. So then I put her name into Facebook in the search panel. And again, what I really want you all to be thinking about is both conceptual and tactical, which is, we all jump to social media and we jump to platform building. We jump to the operational, the tactics, right? But what we all have to remember is that social media is driven by algorithms. Okay. It's not driven by feelings or, I don't know if the Holy Spirit is in the algorithms of the internet or Facebook, but I doubt it. Or maybe, the Holy Spirit, I shouldn't say that. I don't know how the Holy Spirit works. Can everybody mute themselves? I'm hearing some background noise. So this was the first, so I put in the Facebook chat last night at, 8 p.m., Cindy Geary. And this is what came up in the Facebook feed. Now, Cindy and I, we've been Facebook friends forever. But this was a post from 2017. Why is that what Facebook gave me of all the posts that could have come up? And she wrote, "Dear Facebook friends who used to be work colleagues, now that most of you are back in work and thinking about all your work in the new year, I have to ask you to keep me in mind if you need a consultant for research and evaluation technical assistance. I have one client now and enjoyed my work and would like to do more. I created this website blog with information in my about page about my skills, experience, blah, 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 etc." And Cindy Geary's PhD. Now, I don't know if this website is still, but this is how I found Cindy online. So that I'm just going to hold that because again, part of thought leadership is being part of the conversation. So what I want to invite you, I should have had a slide on this. So I should have had a slide that said, what conversations are you a part of? And what conversations are you currently a leader, really respected in your field? What conversations do you want to move into? Which conversations are you a listener in? Which conversations are you an expert in? Which conversations are you learning from? There is literally, as I learn more about as I'm moving out of my comfort zone in many ways, I'm just realizing, and as it comes to books, there are literally countless of conversations happening all around us. And I'm engaged in what I would call conversations, at least at dozens and dozens about decolonization, gender equity, leadership, spirit-led leadership, discernment, I pivot back and forth from sort of secular public health to faith-based, and I just go back and forth, and I'm getting more comfortable with that. So I'm involved with a lot of conversations, and I'm watching a lot of conversations unfold. I'm listening, I'm reading, I'm watching what people are saying online. I'm watching who's saying what online and where online they're saying it. And I'm watching who the gatekeepers are, who has the power, who has the money, who controls the conversation, who, is the stage gate, the gatekeepers for letting new voices into the conversation. So I'm just watching and learning. I'm in a really learning phase. And as I say that, I am welcoming my dear colleague onto the line, not to put him on the spot, but Don Laura is here. Don and I are currently working together on a consultancy. And it's been really an honor to work with Global. Now I've left my day job as of January, and I'm working as a consultant. So I just want to let you all know, and again, welcome Don and those who are just joining recently. I have my colleague here, Dr. Cindy Geary, and Cindy has something that I do not have, which is a PhD. I don't really want a PhD, and I hope, but we'll see. God moves in mysterious ways, so we'll see what the future holds. But when I started my career, for the first, I would say 15 years of my career, I didn't think that publishing in the peer-reviewed literature was for me because I didn't have a PhD. I was working as a master's level public health person, and I was hired to help translate research and evidence into policy and practice. So I was the connective tissue between the researchers and the policy people, the program people who are making change at the country level. I was, again, working internationally, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. So I didn't try to publish in the peer-reviewed literature because I wasn't doing research. I was doing this sort of in between connective tissue kind of work. But then this journal was launched, funded by USAID, funded by US government dollars, and it's called Global Health Science and Practice. I know that the initial editor-in-chief and founder, and they intentionally oriented this journal to be less about research in a traditional sense and more to be about, you can see the tagline, that dedicated to what works in global health programs. So it was explicitly more about, programming and how to translate, evidence into action. And so it just really invited me and other people, I think, of my stage to publish. And so I published over 10 articles with this journal, and it's very, it's well known. So this is how, you become even more of a thought leader in my public health field as you publish in the peer-reviewed literature. So one of the areas I really am interested in is how contraception and menstrual health intersect. And I'm not going to get into any details on that because it's nerdy, but we were hoping, and a colleague of mine nominated integration of contraception and menstrual health to be considered a family planning is the synonym for birth control or contraception, to be a part of the high impact practices list that would go around the world. We submitted a concept note and it was rejected. So then we strategically decided that we wanted to publish a commentary on this topic so that if and when they ever revisited the idea of adding this to the HIP list, the high impact practices list, there would be literature. So that paper was just published, I think, about a month ago. You can see I'm the second author, and the first author, Emily Hoppus, is somebody that I've mentored and I'm really delighted to continue working with. So then what is thought leadership? Guess what happened? I left after 15 years. I left this organization in January. You can see the woman who took my position underneath me, Andre Sossler. And in October, the New York Times published an article about the high prevalence of iron deficiency. And they, my colleagues here, my former supervisor, Lenina Dorflinger, Andre, and Emily, submitted a very short letter to the editor to the New York Times, and it was published. And I'm happy to put the link in the chat. And it's, again, highly technical. It's talking about iron deficiency, the high prevalence of iron deficiency, and the role that contraception can play in potentially reducing heavy menstrual bleeding as a major driver of iron deficiency. And I will tell you all, I'm going to look you all in the eyes, even though I can't see you. This is thought leadership, because for a long time, iron deficiency was seen as a nutrition issue. And most of the interventions around the world have focused on nutrition interventions. So thinking about the role of menstruation and potentially contraception as a way to modulate or moderate contraception, heavy menstrual bleeding, which could contribute. So I know we have at least one medical doctor in here, so I'm going to stop talking because it's not my area of expertise. But what I want to point out to you all is that these researchers, the top author on this, Dr. Lenina Dorflinger, has a PhD in reproductive biology, I think, reproductive physiology. She's not a writer, right? But she's writing. And she got published in the New York Times. They just submitted this op-ed to the info@New York Times or whatever it is. So we can all be writers. We're all writers, and we're all we can all be thought leaders. So then the question is, what does that mean for faith-based writers? So again, for those who've joined, I have about another maybe 5 to 10 minutes of comments, and then I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Cindy. These are my 3 books, and I never intended to be a published author. For those of you who know my story, I was unexpectedly had a conversion experience in my early 30s and was baptized and confirmed as a Christian and as in the Episcopal Church. And my first book was really just something I had to write. It was like I was pregnant and the baby was coming. So my first book, Following the Red Bird, which is on the bottom there, was published by Light Messages Publishing, I think 2017. And it's really the story about my quirky faith journey and the year that followed my baptism. My second book, Their Faces Shown, is about our experience as foster parents. And my third book was published by Broadleaf Books in 2021, Reclaiming Rest, about Sabbath keeping. So like you who are writers, I've been wondering, let me rephrase that. I have these 3 books, and then the question is what next? What am I, writing these books was really a spiritual practice for me and a spiritual journey, listening for God's voice. What am I being called to write next? So I didn't have a big agenda. I never intended to, get on Oprah. None of these things was the agenda, right? So what do I do now? And I have this whole, and there's all these classes about platform building. You go to workshops, etc. So what is a person to do? So what I have done is leverage my last book, which is about reclaiming rest, and really is a spiritual exploration of Sabbath keeping. What I have discovered is that very few people want to talk, some of you have heard this, very few people really want to talk about Sabbath keeping as a spiritual discipline, but everyone wants to talk to me about how burnout they are. And guess what? I have been experiencing burnout too. So I left my job in January, as I mentioned, and I wasn't ready to say it at the time, but I was burnt out. For those of you who are interested in the literature on burnout, World Health Organization classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon for the first time in 2019. So there's a growing body of literature about the prevalence of burnout. There's indicators, there's evaluations. This is a whole thing, that burnout is real. It's an occupational phenomenon. It's a public health issue. And in my opinion, I think it's becoming a global crisis. I think our best people are burnt out, and we have a lot of crises and challenges coming down the road and that are happening right now. And we need our best resources, which is our people, to not be burned out. So this is a conceptual model that my colleague Phyllis, I'm not sure if Phyllis is on the line, sent me. It was posted on LinkedIn. You can see the creator there, Nick Petrie. I don't know him, but I like this image a lot. And so I'm, now doing some consulting around the topic of burnout and leading retreats on that. This is not what I expected to do when I wrote my book, but this is where God has led me. So these are all the places that you can see that I'm showing up online. I've added burnout to my resume. Phyllis and Bonia and I led a webinar the other day. You can see that my post on Facebook about that. Again, we can move into the tactical and talk about social media. I've been very active on what was formerly Twitter. Many other people have been as well. Now that it's X, I've stopped, posting very much on X, but I've changed my bio line now that I've assumed leadership of writing for your life. You can see a post on X that I made last week. These are 2 books that I'm reading: Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During the Next Crisis, and Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey, which I highly recommend, was a New York Times bestselling author. She really talks about the linkages with justice and rest, highly great. And I'm also following the discussion online, which is, and every writing class you take will say that the most important thing rather than social media is to build up your email list. So for example, I'm on the Atlantic's email list. And so I get their daily newsletters and I just scan the headlines, and you see that the last bullet of their article was sleep more and be happy. So happier. So everybody's talking about rest and burnout. And so I'm just trying to follow the conversation, even though I've never had expertise per se in this arena. And it's something that I struggle with myself. So I'm just trying to show up vulnerably. So again, all of these things get back to the question of brand, right? And I almost took these out. Now I'm embarrassed I kept them in. But these are new headshots I took last December. Dawn got to see the one on the left. I put the one on the left last night on Facebook. But the question is, what is my brand? What's the first word that comes to mind when you see the pictures of this person? Don't answer. Just, think about it. So then I unexpectedly got some headshots taken a few months later. It was unexpected. I walked into a bookstore and a woman was there offering buy donation for an LGBTQ plus local organization to do headshots at my local bookstore, Flyleaf Books. And so I did them with my husband. And my husband, for those of you who know, just has been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I'm starting to write about that on Medium, publishing some poetry with him about it. So which better reflects my brand? Is this the Kate that I want to project? The public health expert? And or this woman who's recovering from burnout? You can help me decide. I'm going to hand this over to Cindy in a minute to hear her story about thought leadership. But I just want to say, clearly I don't have all the answers, but I'm really interested in the questions. And my husband and I recently were tentatively, but definitely going to be, my husband and I are co-authoring a book of poetry together that I'm hoping will be published next year. And we went to a poetry retreat recently at Cayuga Episcopal Retreat Center that David White was one of the keynote speakers. And for those of you who don't know David White, I strongly recommend you look him up. He's an internationally acclaimed poet. And during the talk he gave, he kept encouraging us to turn sideways into the light. And you can see this from the first line of his poetry: turn sideways into the light, as they say, the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Be impatient with easy explanations and teach that part of the mind that wants to know everything, not to begin questions it cannot answer. So perhaps I shouldn't have asked the question, what is thought leadership, since I can't totally answer it. But I do want to just leave you with, when we were on this retreat with David White, he explained this image of turning sideways into the light, which is an old Celtic image. So it's a Celtic from a Celtic folklore, if I'm not saying this incorrectly. And 2 armies came together to fight. And one of them, instead of fighting, turned sideways into the light and disappeared into sort of like a mystical realm. And so I've just been thinking about this phrase, turn sideways into the light, a lot as we think about who we are, how we want to show up, how to deal with the complicated world of so much noise, so much changes in social media, all that tactical stuff. What is the conversation that we're being invited to join into? Where does God want us to show up? Where does God want us to speak? Where does God want us to write? When does God want us to listen? And then how can we show up in unexpected ways so that instead of having the same conversations over and over where we're sort of pounding each other, we can perhaps turn sideways into the light and change the conversation. I'll just say these are my two final slides. One of my critical priorities in all of this is that I'm lonely. I don't like working home alone. I miss being with people. So I'm forming intentional, what I'm calling compassion circles. This is an image from a colleague of mine, Suzanne Visson. We had a call yesterday. She wrote a beautiful book, Broken Wide Open, Broken Wide Whole. And she has a prayer in there about healing circles. So, all of this, but just who's in your compassion circle, who's in your healing circle who's in your thought leadership circle where you can have honest discussions about some of these topics. Again, I want to give a shout out to my colleague Phyllis Mbonya, who's coming from Kenya to Durham, North Carolina, where I live later in December. And she and I are engaged in a lot of these conversations. So if you want to, we're more on that coming soon. I'm going to actually save this was meant to be, Cindy, a transition slide to you. This is American Library Association in 2017 when I was launching my first book with Light Messages, Following the Red Bird. And I haven't been to an event like this since the pandemic happened. This is where I met Joyce Dinkins from Publishing in Color. And, we're in a really different kind of world. We're in a hybrid world right now. We don't do these big events all the time so much. So, but Cindy and I thankfully knew each other from our previous work in public health. And I'm going to let her tell you her story and about her book, which she co-authored with LaHoma, Going to School in Black and White, a Dual Memoir of Desegregation. And maybe, Cindy, I know that was a lot and you weren't even sure probably what I was going to say, but maybe you can just introduce yourself and then we can both take questions. So I'm going to pause here and check what's been going on in the chat. And Cindy, if it's okay with you, I'd love to have people look at your book cover, but then maybe I'll take the screen downs or the slide down so that you can just have the image on your face. Does that work?
That's fine.
That's fine. Over to Cindy. Go ahead, Cindy. Do you want to could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book and how you define the phrase thought leadership, both, in whatever ways make sense to you? Thanks.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Kate, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this conversation. I've really enjoyed being in these webinars the past few months and happy for this time to be with other writers. And so this book, Going to School in Black and White, as Kate mentioned, I worked for nearly 30 years as a researcher, a public health researcher. Actually, I have a degree in social psychology, but did a lot of work in family planning and AIDS prevention and treatment. And that's where I knew Kate. But I knew I wanted to do some other kind of writing, something what I felt might be more heartfelt than the rigors of science. And so I started thinking about doing creative nonfiction writing. And I just happened to be in a writing group with LaHoma, who's the co-author of this book. And we had worked together at Family Health International, but didn't know till this writing group that we had both gone to the same high school. And this high school, the year that I started this high school, before it had been an all-Black high school, it was 1970, and that was the year that school integration was ordered from the judicial system. It was the first year of court-ordered desegregation in Durham, North Carolina. And what was unusual about this situation, in many places, it was Black students being bused into white schools. In Durham, the big change was assigning white students to go now for the first time to what had been the all-Black high school. And so LaHoma came 2 years later. She would have gone to this school anyway. LaHoma is African American, and but this was a whole new experience for me. But LaHoma and I had been in high school together, different years, but didn't know it until many years later, after we already had met each other as work colleagues. Anyway, when we found this out about each other in a writing group, we we started telling each other our story about what it was like for us. And we decided to write this book to tell this story because we thought, being that school integration had been an important project to promote racial justice, racial equality in education. But we weren't sure that was really true when we started talking to each other about it. We wanted to explore, we had had that experience in high school and then we put it away. And then here we were talking about it and we wanted to explore more about what it had really meant over the years. And so we had all these questions. And so we put this book together. We wrote it in alternating voices. One chapter's hers, one chapter's mine. And we took it from before high school, our lives before high school, through high school, and then what it meant in our other lives. So luckily, because I knew Kate, I found Light Messages Publishers, and it got published in 2017, the same, I guess later in the same year that Kate's first book came out. And we started doing book events. I mean, to talk about the book. And as we wrote the book, it's not a spiritual book per se, it's a show, but I would say my brand, the brand is social justice, racial justice. Even though we talked about our personal experiences, we were interrogating, the efficacy of integration in terms of how it promoted or didn't promote racial justice. So we wanted to talk about that, but we didn't think we were experts in policy or anything. So mostly we just told our story as we were going out. And of course, what's your agenda? Part of our agenda was we wanted to sell books, and we wanted to sell books because we wanted people to hear our story. We knew pretty much by that time we weren't going to make a lot of money from the book. We wanted to break even, more or less. But what we really wanted to do was tell this story. And as we realized we were telling this story, we started hearing other people's stories. And we realized we were in an important conversation with other people. And our audiences were both Black and white, but usually one or the other, because we still live in a segregated social world mostly. But we were hearing from everybody different stories about their school situation, whether they went to segregated schools or integrated schools, or how they felt about all of this. And we realized this was a really important place for them to have this safe place to have this conversation, because people don't talk about race. People are uncomfortable talking about race. They have ideas about it, they have thoughts about it, but they don't feel like they can say them aloud. But because LaHoma and I were modeling that we were talking to each other about our feelings about what it was like to be in this school situation, they could say things too. And so we never thought about this as thought leadership. We did think about it as, I don't know, what did we thought that we wanted to give people a place that maybe they had never, I don't, so I think maybe we were thinking of it as influence, we had a chance to influence people to think about what this meant in their lives. The whole system has changed since we were in school. We were in school in the 70s, and things are very, very different. In fact, they're more segregated now than they were before, when it was a policy. It was actually segregation by policy. Now it's segregation by residents and just the way the school systems are set up. So we didn't want to come and bring answers. We didn't want to tell people what they should think. We just wanted to give them the space to think about how it worked in their lives and what they felt was important for them and their children and other people's children. I will say that this wasn't a spiritual book, but it's spiritual adjacent. Both LaHoma and I grew up in Christian homes, and Christianity was an important part of how it is an important part of how we understand the world and our ethics, and how it affects our feelings about racial justice. And we talk about it in the book. Sometimes this came up in conversations we were having at book events that weren't just at bookstores. In fact, they were rarely at bookstores, but because of the topic, we were invited into places like the International Civil Rights Museum, or to the public library, or we often talk at churches and in book clubs. So really, what sort of became one of our agendas was just to promote the idea that people should talk to each other about race, about their feelings about race, and see how it changed their feelings, or how their actions, or if it gave them new insight into how other people might feel, or what's needed in the world. We were doing a lot of these discussions, and primarily in local areas, but and then COVID hit, and then it put a pause in what we were doing, and we've done some online. And then in the past few weeks, few months, we've actually had more new opportunities to come back and talk in a different, to different audiences about it. And so in terms of thought leadership, we do have a feeling about how we feel about the necessity for racial justice in the school system. We don't have fully the answers of how to accomplish that, but what we wanted, in the end, what happened was we found that it was the conversation about it that became really important to us, and how we could model that and facilitate that. I do want to say that, so if I think of myself as having a brand now, because I've been away from reproductive health research for a while, it would be social justice. It would be racial justice and social justice. And another book that I'm trying to find a publisher for right now is also along that theme. But it's a different book. But if you saw on the book, the name I use, I've intentionally used Cindy Waszak Geary as my creative nonfiction name, as opposed to Cynthia Geary, which was sort of more my academic writing name. And I do have a website that's just Cindy Waszak Geary. And I was surprised to see that WordPress website come up, which was, I thought when I left FHI, I would be juggling more between, consulting reproductive health and doing creative nonfiction. And as you say, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And sometimes what you're expecting isn't what actually happens, and it's all good. So I don't know if I've covered everything.
That's great. I really think that was just so well put, and just, you're hitting on all the themes of conversation and influence. I think that's another word you used that I wrote down, is influence, and people want to be influencers on social media. So again, I think these are all really important concepts for us to be exploring. So we have about 10 minutes left of the sort of formal webinar, and I'd love to just open it up for questions. I was hoping we could get to another sort of group writing exercise, but we're going to be out of time. But I'm happy to stay on after the 1:00 p.m. Eastern time if anybody wants to speak individually. Cindy, you're welcome to as well. But please, are there questions or comments on this topic? And we have some also let me just say one final thing before we hand it over to questions, which is typically what we do during these Essentials for Spiritual Writers is we also share sort of successes and challenges since the last time. And that includes what we use the language of more as blessings and brokenness, to sort of try to use spiritual languages. So we won't have time to do sort of a full sharing this time, but I saw that Kate Kennedy mentioned that she has had a book accepted, which is great. So if anybody wants to share blessings or brokennesses in the chat, big accomplishments or big challenges, this year, also feel free to share those in the chat. And again, we'll look through them because part of this is the community support. But in the meantime, while we have Cindy, are there any, let's start with questions for Cindy and me if you want, but let's focus on any questions for Cindy about her book before we open it up for broader discussion. You can use the reactions at the bottom to raise your hand or just come off mute. Yes, I see Jean. Yay, Portia says she's found a literary agent that wants her book proposal. Congratulations, Portia. And that's so exciting. Really, really exciting. And Jenny says burnout hits efforts at social media. Also, yes, there's a lot on burnout. I see Zari's comment. Thanks, Cynthia. Social justice actually underpins reproductive health, and that's absolutely true. And we are smiling because we totally agree. Any other questions? Does someone want to come off mute and say anything? Go ahead, Zari, please. And then Jenny, and maybe Zari, can you just say where you're calling in from? And you just need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to, sorry, I ran to my chair. So anyways, but I was not expecting to hear so much about experience in global health in today's meeting. I just joined this meeting almost, I fell into it, if you would say. But I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to hear from Cynthia, from you, and from Kate, because I myself have worked in global health for a while. And now that you're saying the kind of things that you were just sharing, Cynthia, I think, the important part is the experiences that we have from global health or public health and how we bring that back into social justice and DEI and other, like the other groups that are forming and are leading the thought process of the communities right now is really important. And I'm intrigued to be part of this conversation right now. And I think we have a lot to share. We have a lot of blessings to share. We have a lot of, the brokenness that we could learn from. But that's all I wanted to say. This is just a blessing for me today. Thank you.
So much, sorry. And just to say, for those of you who do work in some sort of public health adjacent or health adjacent, there's a lot going, or there has been a lot over the last decade about storytelling. And so actually, again, for those of you who, I know we have a lot of pastors on the line, a lot of faith-based leaders who maybe aren't as familiar with sort of the funding landscape on since we're sort of being bivocational today and talking about multiple domains. Donors have increasingly started funding storytelling as a communication strategy, because again, we are so overwhelmed with information and everybody's exhausted, but stories that's very intentionally how I crafted my remarks. And it seems like Cindy too was to tell our stories. So that's just another way to really be thinking about it. Now, that said, for those of you who are faith-based writers, my understanding is that many in the publishing industry feel that the market for memoirs is fairly saturated. And so if you are working on a book or a book proposal, especially, Cindy used the word creative nonfiction. What I was told by my editor at Broadleaf is that they wanted me to hire me to do a narrative nonfiction book, which incorporated my personal experiences, but was not a memoir. So when I read Reclaiming Rest, I did not write it as a memoir. And writing WFL, Writing for Your Life. That's this platform that this is hosting this event, is Writing for Your Life. But yes, maybe we should start a radio. That would be a good idea. So we're running low on time. Let me switch to Jenny. Thanks, sorry. Jenny, go ahead.
Okay, it's just briefly, it's more of a comment, and it's my comment about burnout affecting social media really means I've had a time from hell in the last 2 years professionally, also in public health. And at the same time, How to Heal Our Divides, I had a chapter in, and I had a new book come out, and it overwhelmed me with my professional job to try to be always doing all the social media stuff and promoting those books and those things. And so burnout in one area, I think, really affects kind of burnout in the writing life as well. And I love that curve, but I think it's much more a smaller slope on the upswing at the end. Like it's a steep downswing maybe, but it's a slow uprise. And I would love to hear from Cindy how you have kept your social media championing going when you're in the midst of also your other work life. For me, it's been very hard to be the champion of my writing while I'm trying to also slug through a crummy workspace.
Well, I should say that I retired from my reproductive health research career about a year before my book came out. So I do feel like I work all the time. I just don't bring home a paycheck the same way. But the social media, even without that other work life, that going to work everyday life is a challenge, because it's so much about being current every day. It's like you don't want to be left out of a conversation that's already started. And so I have a certain amount of things I do for going to school in black and white, but I'm also writing another book, and I'm trying to build a platform for that before I even have a publication come out. And so I just have to take a deep breath every once in a while and just say the world won't come to an end if I don't respond right this minute. But the pressure of keeping it current is really real. I agree with you. And if I was doing something else too, it would be really hard.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, Jenny. And I just want to say, because again, we're almost at the hour, so I'm gonna in a minute turn off the recording, but we can stay around and chat for those who want to join. But just Jenny is the author of a beautiful book called Designed to Heal, and she's a medical doctor by training. And Jenny, just because again, one of the things that contributes to burnout and isolation is that we don't know when you're a writer, you don't know if people are reading your work. I mean, you do if you go to events, you do if you have some people, but it can be you can feel like you're speaking into the void. And so I just want to tell you, Jenny, as a word of encouragement, but also as an illustrative example. My colleague Dawn just joined, and when I was in Washington, D.C. for a retreat in May, for a kickoff meeting for strategic planning we're doing, I had your book with me, Jenny, Designed to Heal, and it sat with me all week. And when I felt tired, I would read some of it. So your book, your words, your expertise, your faithfulness encouraged me during a busy and stressful week, and other times of the year too. But I just want to create these dot linkages, these God dots. And I have a colleague and friend, Kathy Izzard, who has a book coming out next year where she talks about the God dots. So I just want to say that I think we're all, in ways we may not even know, connecting to one another and supporting one another. And that's part of thought leadership too, is part of being in that conversation, is being connected to trusted colleagues and working together to advance a conversation that we're part of, but we're not necessarily leading, or we're leaders, but we're not, this is back to that heart angel I showed at the, our hearts can be on our backs too. We can also lead from behind. So is there a final question for me and Cindy? Otherwise, I'm going to turn off the recording and we can stay and have some more informal chats.
Thanks, Kate.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Cindy Geary, for being our guest speaker. Good luck and blessings as you seek a publisher for your new book. I'm so excited for you and can't wait to read it. And just to say to everybody, we are going to have a Writing for Your Life open mic night this coming Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. This is our second Tuesday series. There have been some great speakers this year, but we're going to have an open mic night. I think that all the spots, last time I checked, have been filled, but there's a waiting list, and people don't always show up for online events. So if you want to get on the waiting list, people are just being invited to do a 5-minute sharing, and would love to hear people's voices. So hope you can join on Tuesday at Tuesday, November 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I can put the link in the chat too. So again, thanks to everyone. Thank you all for being heart leaders and thought leaders and conversation partners, and just so grateful to all be together. Thanks again.